This video is about the TR8S in combination with Ableton Live. You probably already know the TR8S is a great standalone unit. It's a great drum machine. Everybody knows this. By the way, here's my first impression and take on how to use it as just a standalone unit. But I believe that in that case, you're using it to like maybe 20% of its potential. It's also just a great effects and parameter model, and it gives you way more than enough control over Ableton Live, like within a live session, or just even if you're just experimenting. And so what does it do? As I mentioned, obviously it's a drum machine, a standalone unit. It's a perfect format and layout to be a MIDI controller. It's an audio interface. It's a performance mixer, which you're able to route external effects through, external in. And I think the most impressive thing is that it's able to do all the things I just mentioned simultaneously in a live setting. And these are all things that we're going to be exploring in this video. So if you're an Ableton or software user looking for a nice, clean, and condensed controller, this could be it for you. This Ableton and a Launchpad, which I have sort of tucked away to the left here, this is pretty much all that you need for a live setup or just for exploring. So if you own one, I encourage you to dust it off and take it out for this purpose. If you don't, it's a great option, which we'll be finding out in this video, which by the way is not sponsored in any way by Roland. It is, however, sponsored by BeatConnect. So first off, what is BeatConnect? It's essentially a software that allows you to collaborate online in real time. So in other words, I'm here in Canada, I could be collaborating, creating with you in real time in Berlin, let's say. I can do this by either connecting my own DAW to the BeatConnect multiplayer DAW, or I could just use their MDAW by itself. And the software is 100% free to download and use. And so here's a few things that BeatConnect offers and what they're all about. You can smoothly share your session and combine your skills with someone else by playing, composing, and editing audio or MIDI in real time. There's also a multiplayer VST control, which could be a great way to come up with interesting results on the fly. BeatConnect is also doing us a solid and encourages cultivating a beat-making community with what's called the Battle Hub. You can join, create, and manage your own battles and competitions for friends or communities using the BeatConnect battle creation tool. They're absolutely on the cutting edge of this sort of technology, and they are revolutionizing collaboration in a very real way. I mean, for beat makers in 2023, this is where we're at. So make sure to check them out. I've left a link in the description for you guys to head over to their website. I highly recommend that you do. So we're gonna take a look at the basic MIDI control setup with the TR8S and Ableton Live. The first thing you're gonna wanna do with your TR8S utility, make sure that, TX edit data is on. Within Ableton, I have 4 audio tracks and a MIDI track here, which we'll get to later on. And this is what scene 1 of this groove sounds like. So drums and Hydrasynth 1, I'm actually gonna mute these two because they're not sounding right now. This is what the groove sounds like. I have recently ventured into techno land, so you're gonna hear a lot more techno from me. And by the way, all of the audio samples here are original and they're available through my Patreon, as well as a bunch of other exclusive content. The go-to is obviously to use these faders as volume control for each of these tracks. So if I move this fader here, you can see that on track 1, there's the volume control. So I've done that on all 4 of these. If you're a brand new Ableton user, the way to do that is this little MIDI button over here, and this is all of my controls that I've assigned. I'm not gonna go too deep into like the ins and outs of how I set that up within Ableton because there's already so much related content here on YouTube. So the next thing is these pots per track. So I've actually assigned the same controls for each track. So if I take a look at that, decay, because it sounds like delay, is my delay effects. So you can hear that on the drums. This is reverb on the drums. And I have fade to gray, which is a nice way to blend things and also to like drop things out in a interesting and soft way. Right, let's jump over to the next one. Right, so you can see that actually for these last 2 here, I've turned up fade to gray because otherwise I find that there's too much low end between these three here. So I'm actually using this in a way as like an EQ and again as a blend. So just with the individual channel section right here, that's where I spend most of my time, and I have so much fun with that. I also have master controls right here. So this is a master EQ, so low end, mid, and high end. I'm not a huge fan of the master EQ, or at least the one that I'm using in Ableton. Obviously, there's so many other options out there. I'm using EQ 3-rack, which isn't the best. I do have high standards because I use the Model 1.4 as a mixer. So it just reacts really weirdly, because if I drop the lows, I don't know, it just gives a really like kind of harsh quality I'm not crazy about. In any case, when you boost up the lows though, it sounds really good. I also have fade to gray on the master on this reverb knob right here. So that could be a cool little transition thing. So all of that just with 4 tracks, like we have power to spare here. Just with this though, this is like the basic layout of putting something together with the TR-8S, whether it's like a full-on performance or if you're just experimenting and having fun at home. And essentially this is like the easiest and most straightforward way of just using the TR-8S as a controller specifically for Ableton. There is so much more that you could do with the TR-8S. Let's take it a step further. The next thing we're going to do is combine standalone drums from the TR-8S along with the audio tracks coming from Ableton Live. This is an awesome thing to do if you want more like individual drum control over your drums. So right now all of my drums are in Ableton right here. They're printed within this track or within this sample. I could, of course, just create 4 more tracks within Ableton and then just route that to these channels here. The only thing is that if you're using a Launchpad, everything just gets really cramped when you start adding more tracks like that. Same thing within your session in Ableton. So this is the type of situation where something standalone just takes a lot of the weight. And because the 8S is so hands-on, all of your controls are right here, like why wouldn't you use these standalone drums? Well, I know why you wouldn't actually, because it takes more work to set up. So I've routed kick, snare, hi-hat, open hi-hat here. I'm just going to raise the volume of those. I'm going to drop the drums, the first track here through Ableton. And so now I have some control over these 4 drums. Maybe I could just drop to the kick along with whatever's happening in Ableton. The only thing here is that in comparison to the controls that I have routed here, you have way less control over your drums within the standalone unit. You're sort of confined to the controls that you have here. On top of that, I kind of made a bit of a mistake. You have to be careful with where you route your Ableton effects, because now if I wanted to add delay to these drums, I'd be affecting the EQ at the same time. So in retrospect, I probably should have brought these over here to a track that I'm not using in order to have control over both of those at the same time. I actually wonder what it would sound like to layer these two together. So Ableton plus standalone drums. Let's see this. Without, with. So much better. These drums might be a little bit loud, so I'm gonna drop this whole kit down a little bit. Maybe like that. Okay, so tried and tested, that's another option that absolutely works great. Up to this point, we've used the TR-8S as a controller as well as an audio interface. Well, guess what? Now we're using it as a mixer with an effects send. So this is LVX. Just gotta dust this thing off, actually. It's an awesome granular delay pedal. Here's a video on it. We've got some daisy chaining 5-pin MIDI action going on here. So the MIDI out of the TR-8S is going into the MIDI in of LVX, just so that it knows the tempo. It latches onto that tempo and you get like a nice rhythmic delay thing going with your internal drums, your standalone drums in the TR-8S. So I'm gonna hit play just with the kick, external in, with the rest of the drums. Maybe turn that feedback down a little bit. So you may have noticed that I weirdly skipped this one fader right here, right in the middle. So this is actually assigned to control a MIDI channel, DET keys within Ableton. So what do I have control over? I have filter on DET keys. I have a mount on washed out, and I also have fade to gray. So that's some effects control. I'm going to mute everything except for, let's say, these. Let's try this. So I can open it up with the filter. Washed out. And then fade to gray to kind of blend it in and out if I want. So just another instrument that I could throw in here and use in this particular track, which you're probably really tired of by now. And by the way, all of this with still power to spare, so we haven't used these last two tracks here. And there's a few other faders up top here, which we also haven't touched. So even still with all of this going on, there's still more. I'm really excited about the power of the TR-8S in this sort of setting. Just to reiterate, we've used it as a controller within Ableton Live. We're using it as a standalone unit. It's a live mixer with an effects send as well as an audio interface for Ableton through my laptop. This really is like the meat and potatoes of what you need to play a full-on performance or just play it, tinker around with at home. If you own a TR-8S, I hope that this inspires you to whip it out and try out some things with it if you're an Ableton Live user especially, or some other DAW user, like it basically acts in the same way, regardless of what software you're using. If you don't own a TR-8S, maybe this is a great reason to pick one up. If you do decide to purchase one, make sure to use the affiliate link for the TR-8S in the description of this video. It helps me so much. Your support is very much appreciated. I have a Patreon as well where I offer discounts for one-on-one lessons for instruments specifically like the TR-8S as well as a bunch of others. If you guys have any comments or questions, comment section, and thanks for being here. Hope to see you in the next one.